Hello, friends, and welcome to the show. This episode, I'll be discussing a advertisement to travel to New York put out by the city of New York, published by Bloomberg Opinion. And then Canada adds Proud Boys and 12 other groups to its terrorist list. The Hill reports, Matt Gaetz says, I would leave my House seat. I would leave my home to defend Trump in impeachment trial. Also from the Hill, Biden approval stands at 49%. And the Daily Caller reports, Hawley hits Biden for abortion record, calls him to reconsider funding for abortions abroad. So I'm going to read this tweet thread from Bloomberg Opinion. Young and ambitious, move to New York, not Austin. Big cities and office settings may be the most appealing to early career professionals who need the networking. Cheap rents offer a golden opportunity. The pandemic accomplished in 10 months what the internet has promised for decades, a shift away from expensive cities as the dominant centers of business activity. It's a shock that's just the beginning to reverberate through the system. Apartment rents in these high-cost metro areas have fallen more than 20% compared with pre-pandemic levels. And I wonder why. It's because so what happened during COVID-19? So you had COVID-19, you had these draconian lockdowns, you had bad measures, you had a lot of sickness, you had businesses shut down, basically lives needlessly lost, businesses needlessly shut down. You had protests encouraged. So basically, you were told that coronavirus was bad unless you were protesting, in which you were immune from the virus. And then you defunded the police, and then crime spiked, and police response was down. So cities became more dangerous while there was these protests and riots, and cities were burning in violence. And the mayors and the governors just doubled down on the lockdowns instead of dealing with the crime. And people in these cities just got sick and tired of it. And there's proposals for even more taxes coming from a lot of these areas. So why would you want to stick around? You're not getting anything in return for your taxes. Why would you stick around? You'd be foolish to just sit there and pay these taxes and not receive anything in return. Meanwhile, rents have actually risen in modestly low-cost areas like Albuquerque, New Mexico, and Fresno, California. No, shoot, Sherlock. It's because of this little thing called supply and demand. Narratives have sprung up about the future of technology industry being in places like Austin, Texas, and Miami, Florida. Places like New York are expensive for a reason. 2021 might actually be a once-in-a-generation opportunity for ambitious young people to get bargain pricing on the best cities in America. That's not a good sell, actually. That means so that means like what once in 50, 60, 70 years. So since the 20s, probably since the 20s, 30s, since the Great Depression, New York City is doing extremely poorly because it's being ran extremely poorly. It's being ran into the ground. So people are fleeing the city because of high crime, bad people, bad government, high taxes. Why would they want to stay there? The argument for New York remains a compelling one. No, it does not. It does not remain a compelling one. There's a reason why people are leaving the city. For those who are early in their career, nothing beats the experience of in-person exposure to countless people in one's industry from whom they can learn and grow. Everything's done through Zoom now. So what's the point of meeting somebody in person when you can just talk to them through Zoom? In fact, you only have to be dressed from the waist up. You don't even have to wear pants. Just ask Jeffrey Toobin. To the extent remote work remains at a high level even after the pandemic, these types of office settings might become even more scarce than they were before, making them more sought after by young workers who need them for career advancement. So they kind of contradict themselves in the same sentence. To the extent remote work remains at a high level even after the pandemic, young people who need to be in person for career, no, you don't. If you're going to be remote work even after the pandemic, you can advance in your career without being in person. High vacancy levels are a problem for a city's tax base and its landlords. That's the key issue, and that's why this fluff piece was probably paid for by the city of New York. But for workers new to a city, they're an opportunity. Low vacancy rates and high commercial rents constrain businesses formation in the 2010s. The opposite could happen in 2021. It's not going to happen. The taxes are oppressive in New York. The regulations are oppressive in New York. There's so many, the government is oppressive. They just force their will upon you and they tax you to death. It's hard to succeed in that city. And now that people have the opportunity to flee, they're taking it without hesitation. Take it as a sign. Either change basically it's either the government needs to change in the city or the people in the city need to change, and you have the people in the city are changing. So people are basically doing the opposite of voting. The people are just leaving. They're saying, no longer have faith in the city, so I no longer choose to be a part of the city. I no longer wish to deal with the failing of the city due to the failure of the leadership. Longtime New Yorkers might still weep for the businesses that were lost, but for new residents, it will mean an abundance of new choices post-pandemic. See how they spin that? So due to de Blasio's oppressive regulations and Andrew Cuomo's oppressive regulations, oppressive lockdowns, their longtime businesses that have been around for generations have been permanently shut down, and longtime New Yorkers are upset about it. But new residents mean, oh, there's going to be brand new choices. There's going to be brand new restaurants, guys. Everything's going to be fresh. It's going to be brand new. All that old stuff, all those old greasy spoons and hole in the wall joints that you get a delicious burger or anything you want to eat at any time of day, that's no longer there. Well, guess what? It's going to be brand new, and new is always better, right? It's just so ridiculous. In New York, elevated vacancy rates and a plunge in rents is creating the perfect conditions for economic improvements. If cities are analogous to the stock market, NYC would be like a quality growth stock that historically traded at a premium to the market. After going through a rough patch, its price is knocked down to 20%, but it's still trading at a slight premium. New York's turnaround is just starting. A purely by the numbers value investor might say that it remains a little expensive and there are cheaper stocks out there, but that ignores all the reasons why it was expensive to begin with. Well, it's expensive to begin with because it was hyped up. When people realize that you don't actually have to be there to do your job in 2021, then there's no reason to be there, right? So stop trying to create reasons. Now, if they were to try to reimagine the city, but they keep trying to push it back as like a business thing. And if businesses are adopting and you're trying to push the future of business, then push something a little different. In my opinion, I don't think they should be just pushing the business aspect of this. If you are young and ambitious, the city with bargain rents you should move to is New York and not Austin. That's true. Austin is extremely expensive, but people are leaving New York because they don't want to be taxed at 50%. New York, what you pay federal, state, and city taxes. In Austin, you just pay federal taxes, and the people seem to be nicer. You deal with better traffic, nicer people, more affordable rent. Just it's Austin is like a little blueberry in the tomato soup of Texas, but it's still Texas. But the only thing that, and I agree with Joe Rogan's approach on this, it's like if you're moving to Texas to flee from some of these failed democratic policies in these cities and states, then don't vote blue when you move here, because you're going to turn it into you're going to vote in those same failed policies eventually. Eventually those taxes will increase to the point to where it was in New York, and then you're going to say, why are my taxes so high? I don't understand. When I moved here, things were so great. This isn't the Austin I remembered. And then you go, and then you'll have to ask and say, well, who did you vote for? Well, I voted for all these people who are like Bill de Blasio, Andrew Cuomo, Gavin Newsom, the mayor of LA, all these people who ran their cities into the ground. And then you wonder why your city was ran into the ground, why your state was ran into the ground. Be smart about it. If you like Texas because Texas is in California, because Texas is in New York, keep Texas, Texas. Keep your city the way it is. If you like your Democratic mayor, but you like your state being ran the way it's ran, but you like your city the way it's ran, maybe vote that way, right? But if you start completely shifting and there's movements to change, Texas blue, change Florida blue, change Ohio blue, and then people don't realize, the reason why they left their state to flee to these other states is to avoid those policies, and yet they still vote for the thing that made them leave to begin with. It's complicated. It's like a Stockholm syndrome of sorts, I guess. So Canada adds Proud Boys and 12 other groups to its terrorist list. Canada's Public Safety Minister Bill Blair announced on Wednesday that the Canadian government is declaring the Proud Boys a terrorist entity, along with 12 other new groups. The decision comes less than a month after the group allegedly joined a violent pro-Trump mob that stormed the U.S. Capitol. Canada is the first country to designate the Proud Boys a terrorist entity. So there's a few problems with this that are just... it drives me bonkers, right? After the group allegedly joined. So there's not concrete evidence. There's not concrete evidence that the Proud Boys as an organization were part of that pro-Trump mob that stormed the U.S. Capitol, right? So there may have been people who were associated with, right? There may have been members of the Proud Boys organization, but if the Proud Boys organizations at large basically disavowed any violence, right? They didn't want any violence in there. I'm not saying that they did or didn't, but I'm saying if they had not wished for any violence to had occurred, then they're basically implying that, well, all it takes is one person from a group, and then the entire group is labeled a terrorist threat. And that is extremely dangerous, A. And B, I'm going to show you something that you may not be aware of. So it is an organization called Five Eyes. The Five Eyes is an intelligence alliance comprising of Australia, Canada, New Zealand, and the UK and the United States. These countries are parties to the multilateral UK-USA agreement, a treaty for joint cooperations in signals intelligence. In the late 1900s, the existence of Echelon was disclosed to the public, triggering a major debate in the European Parliament and, to a lesser extent, the United States Congress. The FVEY further expanded their surveillance capabilities during the course of the War on Terror, and much emphasis placed on monitoring the World Wide Web. The former NSA contractor Edward Snowden described the Five Eyes as a supranational intelligence organization that does not answer to the known laws of its own countries. Documents leaked by Snowden in 2013 revealed that the FVEY has been spying on one another's citizens and sharing the collected information with each other in order to circumvent restrictive domestic regulations on surveillance of citizens. In spite of continued controversy over its methods, the Five Eyes relationships remains one of the most comprehensive known espionage alliances in history. Since processed intelligence is gathered from multiple sources, the intelligence shared is not restricted to signals intelligence and often involves defense intelligence as well as human intelligence and geospatial intelligence. So why do I tell you this? All right. So, as a supernatural intelligence organization that does not answer to the known laws of its own countries, and that revealed that they have been spying on one another's citizens and sharing collected information with each other in order to circumvent restrictive domestic regulations on surveillance of citizens. So, what does this mean? Right? So, this is pretty convenient. Who has become the Democrats' boogeyman? So, this is going to be conspiracy theory time, friends. And I feel like this is a pretty legitimate conspiracy theory because this is all kind of based in facts, right? So these are all truths, right? And so it's just kind of trying to figure out if this is a valid conclusion, and we're going to have to see how this plays out. So in my opinion, my belief are conspiracy theories are just, you have a bunch of facts, right? You're given a puzzle and you're trying to see how the puzzle fits together, right? So you're given a bunch of facts and you're trying to find that valid conclusion. That's all a conspiracy theory is. And it's not, and conspiracy theory makes you sound like a nut job. So this is my theory. So the Democrats in government do not like pro-Trump organizations. The Democrats in government do not like the Proud Boys because they are a male chauvinistic organization that is very pro-Trump, very individualistic. They don't like socialism. They are against a lot of these things that the Democrats currently stand for, right? They go and counter-protest BLM. They go and counter-protest Antifa. They'll go and fight Antifa in the streets. So they are the antithesis of the current Democratic establishment in the United States. Not even Democratic establishment, but Democrat populist movement in the United States. Basically, they're the loud ones who gets the Democrat establishment put into power. So now the Democrats are in power. They want to label anybody that they disagree with, basically white Christian nationals, MAGA people, libertarians, all these groups as domestic terrorist threats. But we have this pesky little thing in the United States called the First Amendment. You have the freedom of speech. So you really can't spy on these groups because there'll be a violation of their freedom of speech. Why are you persecuting people for their beliefs? Why are you persecuting them for their speech? You really can't do that. So a way around that would be to use an organization such as Five Eyes to use Canada to label them. And there's two ways you can do this. You can have Canada label them as a terrorist threat. And so as a terrorist threat, kind of like the US basically spies on all their terror threats internationally. They keep eyes on them and they gather intel. And then if other countries ask them for intelligence, we'll give them the intel. So Canada will gather intel on Proud Boys here in the United States, and then the intelligence apparatus in the United States will just ask them for the information. That way, they don't have to do the illegal thing, which would be surveillance of United States citizens. That way, the FBI doesn't get caught red-handed for spying on citizens like they were caught spying on Carter Page. That's theory number one. Theory number two would be Canada labels them as a terrorist group, and that gives the United States an excuse to label them a terrorist group as well. And anybody affiliated with them, anybody who would be considered a sympathizer of them, anybody who would go, well, they're not really that bad, would then also be labeled as a sympathizer, which would then also potentially make them a terrorist threat as well, which is extremely dangerous. But I think possibility number one is going to be more accurate. And I think you're going to see more countries in this Five Eyes organization label more groups that are enemies of the establishment and the populace of Democrats. Because intelligence is being weaponized. We saw this again with the Carter Page thing, with the General Mike Flynn thing. Intelligence and the intelligence apparatus of the United States is being weaponized against their political opponents. And so I think these other countries are going to start labeling groups as terrorist interests, terrorist threats, terrorist watch lists, all these things, so they can start spying on the opposition of the parties in power in the United States. There's only going to be one way to find out. We're going to see the long-term effects. We're going to see the announcements made by other countries in the upcoming months. And if more countries start announcing that, and if it only cuts one way, right? If they don't label groups like Antifa, who worldwide are burning down churches, worldwide are burning down buildings, worldwide are causing thousands, millions, and billions of dollars in damage, if they don't label groups like Antifa a terrorist threat, but the Proud Boys, which in Canada, Proud Boys isn't really a thing. They're super disorganized in Canada. And the United States, they're fairly organized, but they're still relatively small. It's really hard to say how they would be considered a terror threat. So basically, if everything only cuts one way, it's going to start becoming more and more suspicious, and it's something to keep an eye on for more developments. Before I keep going, why don't you go ahead and smash that like button, subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. Sharing the video would really help gain exposure for the channel. And if you'd like to contribute to the show, please go to notcensoredyet.com/donate. You'll find links available for multiple currencies in which you could donate. Every little bit helps. We wish to stay independent of outside influence. So, House Democrat cheers Gaetz' offer to resign, help Trump with trial. Democratic Representative Brandon Boyle poked at GOP Rep Matt Gaetz on Wednesday, saying he backed Gaetz' offer to resign his seat to defend former President Trump in his Senate trial. I strongly support my colleague Matt Gaetz doing this, Boyle tweeted, sharing a tweet about Gaetz' remark. So these people are just so petty, right? Just small individuals. The Democrat weighed in after Gaetz said during an appearance on Trump ally Stephen Bannon's radio show that he would step down from Congress to defend Trump in his upcoming impeachment trial if asked to do so. Absolutely. If the president called on me and wanted me to go and defend him on the floor of the Senate, that would be my top priority in life. I would leave my House seat. I would leave my home. The Florida Republican added that he views the cancellation of the Trump presidency and the Trump movement as one of the biggest threats to his district. Gaetz, one of Trump's most vocal defenders in the House, has blasted Republicans who criticized the former president or voted to impeach him following the deadly riot on Capitol Hill last month. After House Republican Conference Chairwoman Liz Cheney voted in favor of impeaching Trump, Gaetz led a push for her to be removed from Congress, even traveling to her home state in Wyoming to lead a rally calling for her ouster. Basically just calling for her to leave office. 10 House Republicans, including Cheney, voted to impeach Trump for inciting insurrection during the Capitol riot on January 6th. That has sparked infighting amongst Republicans, with the Senate impeachment trial set to begin next week. House Republicans are set to meet Wednesday to discuss, and that happened yesterday, and she basically won that vote, overwhelmingly won that vote, but it was a closed ballot. It was a secret ballot. So basically, the reporters and conservative pundits and all that were basically saying, I wonder what that vote would have been if it wasn't a secret ballot. If it was an open ballot and people's vote were on the record, as in I support her having leadership, and it wasn't even her being expelled from office, I believe. It was just her no longer being in party leadership. It was, but it was a secret ballot, so people weren't being held accountable. So everybody can say, so all 200 members of the conservative, of the GOP there in the House could all say, well, I voted no, but of course that's not the case. If only 60 voted no and 140 voted yes for her to stay, and 60 voted for her no to no longer have leadership. But of course, you'll eventually have 120 that'll say, no, I voted no. I voted no. I didn't want her to have leadership. People are going to lie about their vote. Biden approval stands at 49% in new Quinnipiac poll. President Biden is beginning his first term in the Oval Office with the approval of roughly half of Americans, but faces a stark partisan divide as he looks to make good on his vow to unite the country, according to a new Quinnipiac University poll on Wednesday. The poll shows the newly inaugurated president approval at 49%, while 36% said they disapprove of how he handled his job in the White House so far. Another 16% they didn't either have an opinion on the matter or decline to answer. The partisan divide on the opinions of Biden's job performance are striking. 89% of Democrats said they approve of the new president's work so far, an opinion shared only by 11% of Republicans. Wow, that is like mirror opposites, right? Independents, meanwhile, were more evenly split, with 44% approving and 36% disapproving. Biden's early approval rating is already somewhat better than that of his predecessor, former President Trump. A Quinnipiac poll released at a similar point in 2017 showed Trump's job approval rating registering at 42% and disapproval at 41%. So the difference is, too, friends, the nonstop just badgering of Trump for 5 years straight. So when Trump came into office, it had been 3 months after he won the election, 2 months after he won the election, of we already need to start investigating him for Russian collusion, Russian hoax. That conspiracy theory was already on people's mind for 2 months. People were already brainwashed. They were QAnoned into believing that Trump was some sort of agent of Vladimir Putin, some sort of agent of Russia, some sort of Manchurian candidate, some sort of agent of the USSR. So it was bananas. The what? Oh, whoa! Of course, Biden's going to do better if you spend an entire year just kissing the man's ass. If there's no bad news about Biden, and there's nothing but bad news about Trump, who do you think society at large, the low information voters who only look at headlines, what do you believe they are going to think who do you think they are going to believe is the better president? It's going to be Biden, of course. But then when you start looking at the weeds of Biden promised people $2,000 checks immediately and then lowered that amount to $1,400. And you see there's, Democrats post their L's on Twitter. That's a Twitter page, and it makes me laugh. And it's people saying, you promised me a $2,000 check. Now it's $1,400. Now it's possibly less than that. Now you're saying it's means tested. Now there's a chance I might not even get it. And I lost my job due to COVID. What is going on? I did not vote for this, right? And you have women basically saying, you just signed with an executive order destroying college sports for women. You're just destroying high school sports for women. And for what? So there's so many things that are going on that I don't believe 49% is a legitimate number. But on top of that, if I were to believe it, it would only be because of the nonstop positive press being received by the Biden administration. They're not being held accountable for the lies being perpetuated. They're not being held accountable for the corruption that is occurring within their office. The person investigating Hunter Biden is now the partner of Hunter Biden's attorney, or former partner of Hunter Biden's attorney, as of just a few months ago. So how is that not a conflict of interest? How? It's just so crazy, and the media is not holding them accountable. So of course public perception is going to be high, because if there is no bad news about Biden, everybody's going to think he's doing an extremely good job, up until they start looking at their paycheck and their paychecks are start being worth less and less, or they go to the gas pump and their gas is more and more expensive, or their groceries are more expensive. And it's going to be extremely hard to say how everything pans out. But the thing that's needed is the press to be honest, and that's all I ask. It's just one consistent standard. If we're just going to berate, if we're going to be extremely combative nonstop to the president, then be extremely combative to all presidents. Don't kiss one man's ass while beating the other one with a golf club over the head. Be consistent. Treat them both like garbage, because guess what? They're both pieces of garbage. They're both horrible individuals. Whoever wants to be the president of the United States is most likely a horrible, narcissistic human being, only there to get the attention. So guess what? Treat them both like the narcissists that they are, and beat them over the head, and hold them accountable for what they promise. Hold them accountable for the obvious corruption that's taking place. If you want to say Jared Kushner and Ivanka Trump, that's nepotism for Trump having hired them as advisors, okay, that's fine. But then don't say, well, Biden is saying no nepotism inside my administration. But you know what needs to be addressed? It's real hard. And so again, the theory time, right? So if I were Joe Biden and I were on the take of 10% because I'm the big guy, and my son is illegally, or not even illegally, but unethically taking money from governments of other countries on my behalf in order to influence foreign policy decisions, right? Again, I'm just saying allegedly, because who's to say? He could be super qualified. He can be well versed in Ukrainian oil and gas, while not speaking oil and having no education in oil or gas. But whatever. So what happens when you work in the White House at that senior of a level? You have to disclose your finances. So it's really hard to hide your corruption when you have to disclose your finances to the government, when you have to actively disclose your finances to the government, so they can make sure you're not on the take of some other country. So by saying I'm so much better than Trump, I'm not going to have nepotism in my office, I'm not going to hire my son as an advisor. No, he should hire his son as an advisor to basically protect himself from that sort of corruption, even the appearance of corruption, because his son being able to do his own thing, his son being able to fly around wherever he wants and collecting bags of cash from whomever he wants, wherever he wants. Well, he's not having to report that income anymore. He doesn't have to disclose his financial documents like Jared Kushner and Ivanka Trump had to do. But so what would be the benefit of Hunter Biden actually going into the White House where he has to disclose all his financial statements? There is no benefit, especially for Joe Biden, if Joe Biden's getting 10% of all that. So don't pretend like Joe Biden is being holier than thou, when quite possibly he's just an evil genius that is just basically understanding that I will get found out if my son works for me, if my son's financial records do have to get disclosed, do have to be looked at legitimately. Because again, it's real sketchy when his son's attorney is the partner of the investigating official looking into the money laundering case against his son. Daily Caller: Hawley hits Biden for abortion records, calling him to reconsider funding abortions abroad. Republican Missouri Senator Josh Hawley warned President Joe Biden Wednesday that his pro-abortion policies are an affront to the deeply held beliefs of Americans. The Missouri Republican called on Biden to reconsider his decision to rescind the Mexico City policy, which prevents federal funds from going to abortions abroad. For millions of pro-life Missourians and millions of pro-life and religious conservatives across the country, your administration's effort to compel American taxpayers to fund foreign organizations working to snuff out the lives of unborn children around the world is an affront to their utmost or to their most deeply held beliefs. Sadly, it provides further evidence that your appeals to unity were primarily words for a campaign, words that you appeared to have little intention of putting into action. Hawley called the Mexico City policy common sense and an important safeguard to ensure that U.S. aid money will not be used by foreign nonprofit organizations to perform or actively promote abortion as a method of family planning. Regardless of where one stands on the moral questions of abortion, we should all be able to agree that resources entrusted to the federal government by American taxpayers should be used for the defense, betterment, and advancement of American lives and American values, not to subsidize the killing of unborn children abroad. Hawley also highlighted Biden's former record on abortion, calling it perplexing that Biden is making abortion a top priority. During your several decades in Congress, you regularly supported the Hyde Amendment, an important safeguard against federal funds being used to support abortion procedures domestically. Though you have recently changed your long-standing position on the issue, I must ask, how can you justify engaging in a taxpayer-funded effort internationally that we have, in a bipartisan way, no less, long created safeguards against domestically in defense of life, liberty, and conscience? So he kind of brings up a good point. He's like, even Jen Psaki said it. One of the first questions asked of Jen Psaki is, what is Joe Biden's stance on abortion? And she said, well, as we all know, Joe Biden is a devout Catholic, which basically means nothing, right? And then he goes ahead and repeals the Mexico City policy. So my problem behind this is, so I'm neither pro-choice or pro-life. I'm somewhere in between. But so my problem with this is kind of agreeing with his argument is United States tax dollars should not, especially during coronavirus, should not be spent overseas. It should not be spent towards family planning and abortions overseas. It should be spent in the United States. It should be spent on stimulus checks. It should be spent helping drive the economy. It should be spent teaching people how to adapt to the new reality of which is occurring due to the pandemic. It should be spent on PPE. It should be spent on vaccines. It should be spent on so many things domestically that up until everything domestically is accounted for is 100% locked down. 100%, like the war on poverty is taken care of in the United States. All the kids are fed. There are no starving people. There are no homeless people on the streets of the United States. Then we can start spending money on family planning overseas. But up until that point, convince me as to why we should be federally funding abortions overseas. Now, if I were to choose to have a tax deductible donation, right? If I wanted to donate to an organization that basically does what the U.S. is going to be funding, that is my personal decision. But if I'm going to be paying federal taxes, then why am I going to be paying so much in federal taxes only to not receive those benefits in return? And I understand not all federal, it's not like I'm not going to be whining about it like Andrew Cuomo saying, oh, we pay so much in taxes, but we only get so much back. No, I don't expect to get everything back in which I pay in, but I expect everything to go back towards the country, everything to benefit the country up until that point to where we can start benefiting other countries. So right now, America isn't too hot, friends. So we need to kind of put America first. We need to ensure everything is being addressed in the homeland before we consider wasting money overseas. And I consider this a waste of money. Family planning, all this stuff is extremely important. But unless, like I said before, unless the homeless crisis is taken care of due to the lost jobs due to COVID, unless the hunger crisis is being taken care of due to the lost jobs due to COVID, unless job retrainings have occurred due to the lost jobs due to the Keystone XL pipeline being lost. So there needs to be federally funded job training programs so people can get into these renewable energy industry from the fossil fuel industry. There needs to be a lot of money that needs to be reinvested from being spent outside of the U.S. to back domestically. We need to rebuild, and use Joe Biden's terms, we need to build back better. We need to build the United States back up. If we're struggling as a country, we don't need to be wasting money overseas. And that's exactly what we're doing by funding programs such as this. So, like I said, I agree with Hawley halfway on this. So I agree with him that we shouldn't be spending U.S. tax dollars on stuff like this overseas. The argument can be made that possibly some of it should be spent on in the United States because there's people who do need abortions in the United States and could or may not be able to afford it. And so questions may arise whether or not that should be funded by the government. And that's a different conversation. But as for this conversation, until, like I said, unless all the blocks are checked within the United States, don't be signing checks. Don't be saying checks for feel good programs overseas when there are people hungry, when there are people homeless, when there's people without jobs here in the United States. That's federal tax dollars that's being wasted on non-US citizens. We need to ensure the health, safety, and security of United States citizens using our tax dollars before we start basically the health, safety, and security of other nations. Because guess what? If we're insecure, if we're unhealthy, if we're unfit, then we can't protect other countries if we're ourselves unhealthy. So I'll be posting another video today. Until then, friends, I'll see you later. Have a good one. Bye.